In July 1974, the lifeless body of a young woman was discovered in a dune near Race Point Beach in Provincetown, Massachusetts. For nearly 5 decades, her identity remained an unforgettable memory and earned her the nickname Lady of the Dunes. What made this case truly shocking wasn't the brutality of the crime, but the reality that the victim remained nameless. There were no missing persons reports, worried family searches, or clues to her past. She was a complete mystery. Detectives chased countless leads, but every door led to a dead end. Who was this woman? And what led to her tragic death? Let's watch this heartbreaking story of the Lady of the Dunes. Provincetown is a small yet popular tourist destination known for its beautiful beaches and vibrant community. The livelihood of the town depends upon tourism. As it's a small town, people used to know each other and live like family. There was peace everywhere until a gruesome discovery occurred. It was July 26, 1974, and 12-year-old Leslie Metcalf was enjoying a lovely day with her family. They were walking with the dog in the dunes about a mile from the beach at Cape Cod National Seashore in Provincetown, Massachusetts. Suddenly, the dog caught the scent of something and took off further into the bushes. Leslie followed and soon saw what she thought at first was a deer. But as she drew closer, she and her family could see that it was the body of an unidentified woman who was clearly deceased. The police were called, and soon investigators circled the scene. As detectives examined the area, they found the remains just yards away from a road, with 2 sets of footprints leading to the body and tire tracks nearby. The proximity to the road suggested that the killer might have wanted to dispose of the body quickly. Police discovered tire tracks 50 yards from the crime scene, which indicated a vehicle that could have escaped. This suggested the killer may have driven to the location and fled in a hurry, which left behind a potential lead in the investigation. Her body was laying face down on half of a beach blanket with no signs of struggle. This lack of resistance led police to theorize that she either knew her killer or had been asleep when she died. A blue bandana and Wrangler jeans were found under her head, and her long brown hair was tied back with a gold elastic band. Her pink-painted toenails showed that she took care of herself and had her own style. Moreover, the physical description of the woman revealed she was approximately 5 feet 6 inches tall and weighed 145 pounds, with an athletic build. The dental work of the victim was unusually expensive, with crowns priced between $5,000 and $10,000. However, for now, several of her teeth had been removed, and both hands and 1 forearm were missing. Estimating her age proved challenging, with investigators placing her between 25 and 40 years old. However, some believed she could have been as young as 20 or as old as 49. Her date of death sought to be anywhere from 10 days to 3 weeks before she was found. The cause of the death was severe neck injuries, which were likely from strangulation. 1 side of her head had been crushed, most probably with a military-type entrenching tool. The nature of the attack suggested a disturbing level of intimacy. Investigators believed the attacker lay next to the Lady of the Dunes before delivering the fatal blow to her head. Additionally, the autopsy revealed signs of sexual assault, which investigators believe happened after she died. The deliberate removal of identifying features such as teeth and hands suggests the killer sought to hide either the identity of the victim or their own connection to her. This calculated act has fueled speculation and deepened the mystery surrounding her tragic death. Her last meal consisted of a burger and fries. Her body was laid to rest as unknown because no one knew her identity. She was buried near the town center at the cemetery of St. Peter. A simple gravestone marked her final resting place, bearing the inscription, "Unidentified female body found, Race Point Dunes, July 26, 1974. Dr. Stanley Schwartz reconstructed the skull from fragments, The reconstructed skull was stored in a cardboard box during the investigation in the office of the chief. Despite efforts, the skull remained unidentified and it awaited a name that never came. Police started a thorough investigation on this mysterious case. They accurately reviewed thousands of missing person reports and cross-referenced them with records of vehicles that had passed through the area. Despite their efforts, they found no matches, which even deepened the mystery surrounding her identity and the circumstances of her tragic death. Upon arriving at the scene, investigators observed some striking details. The sand surrounding the victim and the nearby beach blanket were mysteriously undisturbed. This suggested that her body had been carefully placed in that exact spot rather than left haphazardly. Moreover, this deliberate act spoke to a level of planning and calculation on the part of the killer. It raised more questions than answers. What motivated the perpetrator to choose this location? Was there a specific reason for leaving her body in this precise spot? Despite extensive searches of the surrounding dunes, which led to the discovery of her personal and key items, no further evidence appeared to explain who the attacker was or what happened before the crime. Investigators faced numerous challenges while trying to identify her. Every abandoned bicycle and vehicle in the area was thoroughly examined, and owners were tracked down. As part of the investigation, officials looked at the vehicles that had driven through the dunes before the body was found. Unfortunately, these leads did not yield any significant breakthroughs. Her identity was unknown for a long time. Therefore, she became the Lady of the Dunes. To expose her identity, her teeth and skull were reconstructed to match dental records. Thousands of dentists nationwide were contacted to identify the distinctive and expensive dental work, but there were no results. The case gathered national attention, with articles published in dental journals and police magazines. In 1979, a forensic anthropologist created a clay model of the face of the woman. His interpretations based on the model were then distributed worldwide. In 1980, investigators exhumed the remains of Lady of the Dunes for further examination. The police chief made heartfelt pleas for information on national television and in magazines. He traveled extensively across North America, where he pursued leads, but none proved fruitful. Over the years, Chief received thousands of letters and phone calls, some of which offered potential clues to the identity of the victim. Each tip was carefully investigated, and various family members from all over the country supplied dental records for comparison. However, no match was ever found. In desperation, Chief even consulted a psychic, but the result was nothing. As time passed, the case grew cold. With no concrete leads to investigate, the Lady of the Dunes remained a haunting mystery. However, there was another shocking fact, and a mysterious gesture has become an annual tradition. Every July 26, on the anniversary of her discovery, someone left flowers and bars at the site. The identity and motivations of this person remained unknown. Was it the killer, someone who knew her, or a good person paying respects? There were no leads, and police were looking for new ones. It was not until when this happened. In 1987, a Canadian woman shocked investigators with a terrifying revelation. She disclosed this to a friend and claimed she had witnessed her father strangling a woman in Massachusetts around 1972. Police immediately pursued this lead and hoped it would shed light on the identity of the Lady of the Dunes. Despite their efforts, they could not locate the woman or gather further evidence to substantiate the claim. Around the same time, another woman approached the authorities with a heart-wrenching suspicion. She believed the reconstructed image of the victim resembled her long-lost sister, who had vanished from Boston in 1974. This lead sparked renewed hope for answers. Detectives then deeply investigated the disappearance of her sister to establish its potential connections to the Lady of the Dunes case. But again, it was all in vain. Not only this, But there was also another lead from the police criminal records. In a separate angle, investigators focused on Rory Jean Kessinger, a notorious criminal who had escaped from jail in 1973 at the age of 25. Authorities noticed a close resemblance between Kessinger and the victim, which raised suspicions about his possible involvement. However, DNA testing from the mother of Kessinger ultimately did not match the victim, which again led investigators to rule him out as a suspect. Additionally, the cases of two other missing women, Frances Ewald from Montana and Vicki Lamberton from Massachusetts, were thoroughly examined but ultimately dismissed because these were unrelated to the Lady of the Dunes. Each new lead brought hope, but the mystery remained unsolved. The community and investigators were left with haunting, unanswered questions. There were multiple theories surrounding the circumstances of her death, and each of them attempted to explain the mysterious clues and disturbing facts. Here are some of them. The first theory was about Tony Costa. His name often surfaces in connection to this case. He was a serial killer active in the area at the time. However, investigators quickly ruled him out as a suspect as he died in May 1974. It was 2 months before the discovery of the body of the woman in July. Despite his elimination as a suspect, the name of Tony Costa frequently appeared alongside in discussions about the case. The second theory surrounding the Lady of the Dunes involved Haddon Clark, who was a convicted serial killer notorious for his heinous crimes. The criminal history of Clark included the murders of 6-year-old Michelle Dorr in 1986 and 23-year-old Laura Houghteling in 1992, for which he received 2 consecutive 30-year sentences. While imprisoned, Clark made numerous confessions and claimed responsibility for dozens of murders. In 2004, he wrote a letter to a friend, asserting that he was the one who killed the Lady of the Dunes. According to his account, he disposed of the evidence in the garden of his grandfather. He knew the identity of the woman but refused to mention it because police had mistreated him. However, Clark had paranoid schizophrenia. It is a mental disorder characterized by hallucinations, delusions, and paranoia, which distort reality and impair daily functioning. It involves deformed thinking, suspiciousness, and social withdrawal, and requires treatment through medication and psychotherapy to manage symptoms. Therefore, it raised doubts about the credibility of his claims. Despite his history of confessions, law enforcement could not verify his involvement in the Lady of the Dunes case. In 2000, Clark led police to the former residence of his grandparents, where they discovered a plastic bucket containing over 200 pieces of jewelry, which also included items from his known victims. He referred to these as his trophies and suggested a disturbing pattern of collecting souvenirs from his crimes. Despite these discoveries, authorities never found concrete evidence linking Clark to the Lady of the Dunes. The history of Clark as a manipulative and unreliable source underscored the challenges in determining the truth in his claims of guilt in multiple unsolved cases. The body of the woman was exhumed again in March 2000 for DNA testing. Investigators turned to an extraordinary identification method that had been used only once in Massachusetts. State Police Sergeant Richard Nagel stated, "We have no record of another case like this. It's the first time." Let's come toward the James Whiteley Bulger theory. In May 2010, experts took CT scans of the skull of Lady of the Dunes to create computer-generated detailed images. These images were then sent to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, where forensic artists created a new 3D reconstruction of her face. Investigators made multiple facial reconstructions between sketches and images in 1979 and 2006, and circulated these in the whole area, but got no lid. In the meantime, another compelling theory revolves around notorious mobster James Whitey Bulger. During the 1960s and 70s, James Whitey Bulger was a familiar figure in Provincetown. He regularly visited popular LGBT bars such as the Crown and Anchor. At the time, Provincetown provided a welcoming refuge for the gay community, which faced discrimination elsewhere. Meanwhile, author Sandra Lee adds another surprising twist. As a young girl, she claims to have discovered the Lady of the Dunes before the teenager Leslie, who reported it to the police. Lee remembers the scene clearly. The body lay face down with a neck wound, covered by a green blanket. Later, she saw a similar blanket at her family's campsite near June's Edge Campground, close to the discovery site. Lee alleges her stepfather associated with Whitey Bulger and occasionally socialized with him in Provincetown. On one occasion, her stepfather returned home intoxicated, covered in a green cotton blanket that resembled the one found with the victim. This coincidence caught the attention of the investigators when Lee shared her story around 2012. Detective Meredith Labor confirmed that notorious gangster Whitey Bulger had a substantial presence in Provincetown during that period. Despite the later capture of Bulger and imprisonment for other crimes, he never mentioned anything about the Lady of the Dunes before he died in 2018. His brutal reputation and rumored involvement in human trafficking added weight to the theory. The removal of the teeth of the victim was especially significant because it presented its similarity to known methods of Bulger. However, like many leads in this enduring mystery, this theory lacks solid evidence to validate it fully. Even if he had some connection to the crime, the identity of Lady of Dunes remains unknown. This left investigators and the community still searching for answers for 5 decades later. Another theory was revolving, and it again sparked light among people. This theory was Jaws film theory. It was about a movie that warned of the dangers of human greed, ignorance, and disregard for nature. Moreover, it tells the story of a small beach town that prioritizes profits over safety, which ignored warnings of a giant shark lurking in the waters. In 2015, reputed author Joe Hill, who was the son of the famous author Stephen King, proposed an interesting theory about the Lady of the Dunes. While watching Jaws movie for the first time, Hill noticed a brief scene that caught his eye during the 4th of July festivities. He suggested that the unidentified woman, who was known as the Lady in the Dunes, might have appeared as an extra in Jaws before her tragic demise. Specifically, Hill pointed to a scene approximately 54 minutes into the movie, set during a 4th of July crowd sequence. Here he identified an extra who was a young woman with brown hair and a blue bandana, and who strikingly resembled police sketches of the unidentified lady. Hill posed a thought-provoking question. Could this mysterious figure, which no one had been able to identify, have been seen by millions in the classic summer thriller without anyone realizing it? In that same post, Hill also acknowledged multiple issues with his out-there theory, such as the extra not wearing the same type of Wranglers found with the lady. Even more, he noted, blue bandanas were worn by 6 other women in the following sequence in the movie. Nevertheless, he pointed out that Jaws was filmed near where the body of Lady of the Dunes was found on the Vineyard of Martha, which was approximately 100 miles away. This proximity sparked local curiosity about the production of film. Drawing on his storytelling background, Hill wrote that celebrity attractions and nearby locations could have drawn the lady to the Vineyard of Martha. It was much like any other summer visitor exploring the Cape Cod area. Despite the skepticism, the theory of Hill found some unexpected support. He recounted how an FBI agent he consulted cautiously encouraged him to pursue his idea and suggested that stranger ideas like this had cracked colder cases before. Reflecting on his unconventional theory, Hill admitted to the Washington Post that he struggled greatly. He found difficulty in distinguishing whether his imagination was merely at play or if there might be substance to his idea. The absence of concrete evidence or eyewitness accounts linking the background actors in Jaws to the Lady of the Dunes has made investigators cautious. Jaws by Steven Spielberg attracted local talent and suggested a regional casting pool. This limited casting scope supports the theory that the mysterious woman might have been a resident of the Provincetown area. Detectives continued to seek leads and hoped someone would reveal the truth. But there was no lead. In 2022, a significant breakthrough occurred in the Lady of the Dunes case when the skeletal remains were sent to Othram for analysis. Using advanced DNA technology, a profile was generated that allowed investigators to trace distant relatives of the victim, which eventually led to her identification. On October 31, 2022, the FBI field office in Boston made a long-awaited announcement. The victim was identified as Ruth Marie Terry. The discovery marked a significant breakthrough in the Lady of the Dunes case. After decades of uncertainty, it finally shed light on a mystery that had puzzled investigators and the community for 48 years. However, the announcement did not disclose any details about potential suspects or why Terry was in Massachusetts at the time of her murder. The FBI credited investigative genealogy for the identification of Terry. It was a method that has been instrumental in solving numerous cold cases and identifying over 150 criminals, and included infamous cases like the Golden State Killer. The Golden State Killer, who was also known as Joseph James DeAngelo, was a former police officer and responsible for a series of rapes and murders in California during the 1970s and 1980s. He was identified and arrested in 2018 after decades of evading authorities using DNA evidence and genealogical research. This genealogical scientific approach involves using DNA databases to match genetic profiles with known relatives, which pierce together familial connections to expose the identities of unidentified victims. The identification of Ruth Marie Terry represents a significant step toward closing the Lady of the Dunes case. Ruth Marie Terry was born on September 8, 1936, in a small mountainside shack in Whitwell, Tennessee. Her parents were Johnny and Eva Terry, with her mother tragically passing away at just 23 years old. The life of Ruth took a significant turn in 1957 when she left Tennessee to move to Livonia, Michigan, to work at the Fisher Body automotive plant. The next year, she gave birth to her son, Richard. However, financial difficulties forced her to make a difficult decision. Richard Hanchett Sr. was her workplace superintendent, and she allowed Richard to adopt her son in exchange for paying off her expenses. After the adoption was finalized, Ruth moved to California and started a new chapter in her life. On February 16, 1974, Ruth Terry married Guy Muldavin, who was an antique dealer in Reno, Nevada. In August 1974, just months before her death, Ruth and Guy visited her family in Whitwell, Tennessee. Her grandniece Brittany noticed that Ruth seemed distant and uneasy around Guy, who appeared overly possessive. The couple then traveled to Chattanooga to visit the half-brother of Ruth, Kenneth, and his wife, Carol. They mentioned plans to travel to the U.S. to search for antiques, which included a possible stop in Massachusetts. Ruth Marie Terry visited home alone in April 1974, and it was just a few months before her body was found. As she went missing, no one knew about her. In late summer 1974, Guy Muldavin visited the family of Ruth Terry in Tennessee and claimed she had vanished from their California home after they fought their honeymoon. He stayed briefly and said he had no idea where she was. Her brother James searched for answers. He hired a private investigator in California who discovered that belongings of Ruth had been sold. For 20 years, a family of Ruth assumed she was dead and listed her as deceased in family obituaries. However, her sister-in-law, named Carol, suspected Ruth might be in a witness protection program and was unable to contact her loved ones. On November 2, 2022, the Massachusetts State Police announced they were seeking information about the late husband of Ruth Terry, Guy Rockwell Muldavin, who was born on October 27, 1923, and passed away on March 14, 2002. The background of Guy Muldavin was marked by adoption. He was an orphan taken in by Abram Albert Zadworansky Muldavin and Sylvia Lily Silverblatt. He also had a brother, Michael Semyon J. Muldavin. The life of Guy Muldavin took shape during World War II. In 1942, he studied at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York City. However, due to a mastoid infection, he was considered unfit for military service. After the war, the personal life of Muldavin started to grow. On May 11, 1946, he married Joellen May Loop in Bellevue, Pennsylvania, while working as a professor. The couple moved frequently and lived in New York, California, and Seattle, where Muldavin worked as a disc jockey. However, their marriage was short-lived. Guy and Joellen divorced on July 16, 1956. In 1958, Guy Muldavin married again with Manzanita Aileen Ryan in Kootenai, Idaho. Manzanita had a 16-year-old daughter named Dolores Ann Mearns from a previous marriage. On April 1, 1960, Manzanita Ryan and her daughter, Dolores Ann Mearns, disappeared in Seattle. Guy Muldavin became the prime suspect. Muldavin attempted to escape but was captured by the FBI. He was charged with unlawful flight to avoid testifying about the disappearances. Guy Muldavin quickly remarried after the disappearance of Manzanita. He wed Evelyn Marie Emerson in King County, Washington on July 29, 1960. This was the same woman Guy would marry again in Los Angeles on August 10, 1963. However, Muldavin got in trouble when he faced burglary charges for swindling $10,000 from the family of his third wife. In 1961, he was convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Muldavin received a reprieve in March 1962 when a judge suspended his sentence on the condition that he repay the stolen funds. True crime author Ann Rule examined case of Muldavin Guy in her 2007 book Smoke, Mirrors, and Murder. She focused on the 1960 disappearances of Manzanita Ryan and her daughter Dolores Mearns. Investigators discovered dismembered human remains in the septic tank of Muldavin, but couldn't confirm they belonged to the missing woman. Despite suspicions, Muldavin wasn't charged due to insufficient concrete evidence. Ann Rule noted that Muldavin married again in 1974, this time to a woman named Terry in Reno, Nevada. She was later revealed as Ruth Terry. Muldavin was the prime suspect in the murder of Henry Lawrence Baird, a 28-year-old bread truck driver. Additionally, he was also suspected in the disappearance of 17-year-old waitress Barbara Jo Kelly, which occurred in June 1950. Barbara was last seen in Humboldt County, California on June 17, 1950, when she went on a date with Baird, who was her boyfriend. The next morning, the body of Baird was found face down on the beach near Table Bluff and had been shot in the back of the head. He was found naked, except for his shoes and socks. The clothing of Barbara was also discovered neatly folded under Baird, though her shoes and stockings were missing. To this day, no trace of Barbara has been found, and it is believed that whoever shot Baird may have kidnapped her. In 1983, after the murder of Ruth Terry, Guy Muldavin published Cooking with Rump Oil. This contained a disturbing recipe, Cape Cod shid. The disturbing content of the recipe sent chills down the spine. An illustration of a long-haired creature who looked innocent was juxtaposed with instructions that implied violence and suffering. The ominous language throughout the recipe only added to the sense of suspicion, and scary phrases like, "The tender look will become one of despair," hinted at a dark and sinister purpose. Later, investigators analyzed and raised concerns about the involvement of Muldavin in the murder of Terry. In 1976, Muldavin relocated to Chualar, California, which is a small community near Salinas. A feature article published in 1985 noted that he had retired from his position as executive vice president of a silver store on Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills. Police find some additional information at the time of his profiling. He was volunteering as a host for a 3-hour weekly call-in show on aging and personal transitions. at the radio station Kazoo in Pacific Grove. Additionally, he worked at a tobacco shop in Carmel. As noted in his obituary, Muldavin was born in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He spent 22 years living in Salinas and worked as a buyer for bullocks. In addition to his career, he appeared to be a poet, artist, and actor, but beneath his charismatic face there was pure evil. He deceived people with his charm and appearance, and he was responsible for a string of heinous crimes. He passed away at home after a prolonged illness and left behind his wife, Phyllis Muldavin, and his sister, Joan Towers. In 2018, Richard Hanchett, son of Ruth Marie Terry, learned the biological name of his mother through DNA testing. Moreover, throughout these years, the Tennessee family thought she was missing. On August 28, 2023, Muldavin was officially identified as the killer of Terry. Terry and her son finally found closure after 48 years thanks to advances in DNA technology and diligent police efforts. The breakthrough brought peace to Richard Hanchett, ended decades of uncertainty, and provided justice for her memory. Dedicated police work and DNA technology made it possible to identify the remains of Ruth and give her loved ones the closure they had long awaited.